I found the first text message on a Tuesday while Marcus was in the shower. Not because I was looking for anything, my phone had died and his was charging on the nightstand. A notification popped up, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. I shouldn't have looked, I know that now, but in that moment I did. The preview showed enough. God, I missed you and can't wait until Saturday, and a string of heart emojis that made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't immediately understand. I put the phone down, didn't unlock it, didn't read the full conversation. I just stood there in my underwear and bra, dripping wet hair plastered to my neck, and felt something crack open inside my chest. That was 3 years ago, before I knew what quiet rage felt like, before I understood that the person I'd built a life with was a stranger wearing a familiar face. Let me back up. I'm Dakota. I was the kind of woman who had her life arranged in neat, careful rows. I grew up in Portland, the middle child between 2 brothers who never quite understood me. My parents divorced when I was 12, civilized, quiet, the kind of split that still left bruises nobody talked about. I learned early that the safest thing was to be reliable, steady, the person who doesn't cause problems. I met Marcus at a conference in Seattle when I was 28. I'd been working at a marketing firm for 6 years by then, climbing the ladder in the way people did when they were good at their jobs, but afraid to ask for what they wanted. He was there presenting about some tech startup he'd co-founded. He was charming in that confident way that made everyone in the room orbit toward him. But what got me was the moment the presentation ended, and he accidentally made eye contact with me while looking awkward and nervous, like the performance had exhausted him. We talked for 3 hours that night. By the end, I'd told him things I didn't usually tell people. He'd listened in that particular way where it felt like he actually heard you. 6 months later, I'd moved in with him. A year later, we got married at City Hall with his brother and my friend Sarah as witnesses. Small, simple, the way I preferred things. Sarah was my best friend from college. We'd stayed close through jobs and moves and the general chaos of adulthood. She'd introduced me to Marcus's friend group, gotten me interested in his hobbies, helped me decorate the house we'd bought in a quiet neighborhood with a small yard and an old oak tree. She was the kind of friend who felt like a sister. Marcus was, or seemed to be, the kind of partner who actually wanted to build something real. He was successful but not arrogant about it. He was thoughtful in small ways. He'd remember that I liked my coffee with just enough cream to make it golden, not brown. He'd leave notes on my laptop when I had big presentations. We'd sit on the porch on Sunday mornings and just exist together without needing to fill the silence. For 3 years, I thought I had it figured out. I worked at the same marketing firm, had been promoted to senior manager, had 3 people reporting to me. I was good at my job. Careful, exact. I didn't take risks, but I got results. Our house was paid for. We had plans for travel, maybe a kid in a few years. Life felt contained and manageable in a way that, looking back, should have felt too good to be true. Then came the Tuesday. After the shower, after seeing those texts, I went through the motions like a person operating a robot version of herself. I made breakfast. I kissed Marcus goodbye. I drove to work and sat at my desk and stared at my computer screen for 8 hours without actually reading a single email. That weekend I did something completely unlike me. I followed Marcus. Not in an insane, obsessive way. Just, I asked what his plans were, and when he said he was meeting some guys at a poker game, I casually mentioned I'd head to a yoga class and then grab coffee with an old coworker. Instead, I drove to the address he'd given me, a friend's house downtown, and I sat in a parking lot a block away with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. He never went to that address. Instead, I watched him drive straight to the Cascade Hotel on the north side of the city. I watched him get out, look around like someone checking to see if they were being watched, and walk inside. I didn't follow him in. I didn't need to. I could see the textures of the story clearly enough already, and adding details would only make it worse. I sat there until 9 p.m. When he came back out, he looked exactly like himself. Same clothes, same walk, same Marcus. But he was carrying secrets now, and somehow that changed everything about him, even though nothing had physically changed at all. I want to tell you I confronted him, that I'm the kind of woman who demands answers and causes a scene. But I'm not. I'm the woman who goes quiet, who thinks, who gathers information. The next week I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body. I was at work, but not really. I was at home, but in a different way. I was performing being normal while my insides had turned into a strange, cold machinery of investigation. Sarah called that Tuesday. She did that sometimes, just called to catch up, tell me about whatever drama was happening in her life. She was a graphic designer, freelance, beautiful in the way that made other women sometimes dislike her immediately. I'd always liked her despite the way men looked at her. Because of it, maybe. Like I wanted to prove that friendship could transcend the way the world sorted us. "Hey," she said, her voice bright. "Want to grab drinks this weekend? I miss you. Marcus has been cool letting you hang out with me, but I feel like I never see you alone anymore." Something in that sentence felt weighted, but I couldn't tell if I was reading meaning into it or if it was actually there. "Sure," I said, "Saturday." "Perfect." I hung up, and I did something I'd never done before. I logged into our shared cloud account, the one where Marcus uploaded photos, and I scrolled back through the last 3 months. I was looking for something, I don't know what. It took me 45 minutes, but I found it. A photo from a beach trip I hadn't been on. Marcus and Sarah, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing. The date was 3 weeks ago. On a Saturday, Marcus had told me he was working on a project. I stared at it for a long time, at their closeness, at the way they were angled toward each other, at the certainty in my body that told me this wasn't just one photo. This was evidence of a whole alternate timeline I wasn't part of. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I couldn't. It was like some part of me was protecting itself by going very, very still. That weekend, I almost cancelled on Sarah. I texted her twice to reschedule and then deleted the messages before sending them. I wasn't ready. I needed more information before I exploded, and the thought of walking into a bar and looking at her face felt impossible. But I went anyway, because sometimes you do the hard thing not because it makes sense, but because you can't figure out how not to. We met at a wine bar in the Pearl District. It was the place Sarah loved, industrial ceilings, mood lighting, the kind of wine that cost more than it should. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, and when she saw me, her face did this thing where it lit up that made me suddenly understand the architecture of her beauty in a way I'd never quite grasped before. I sat down, we ordered wine, and for the first hour we just talked about her work, about a project she was pitching, about a date she'd been on that went wrong. It all felt so normal, so exactly like us. And there was this horrible moment where I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the photo meant something innocent. Maybe I was crazy. But then, while we were waiting for our second round, Sarah reached for my hand across the table. Her touch was warm and familiar, and it made me feel sick. "I've been wanting to talk to you about something," she said quietly. My stomach flipped, my mouth went dry. "Okay," I said. She looked out the window, took a sip of wine. "I've been thinking about us, about our friendship, and I've been feeling kind of guilty about." She didn't get to finish because I pulled my hand away. "Where were you 3 weeks ago?" I asked. My voice was very quiet, flat, like I was reading from a script I'd prepared. Sarah's face changed. You could see it happen, the moment of realization that I knew something, the cascade of calculations as she figured out what to say next. "Dakota." "No," I said, "just tell me." "Where was Marcus?" she asked. The question felt like a knife. I didn't answer that. I stood up. I put a 20 on the table for my portion of the wine, and I walked out without saying another word. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and I finally cried. But it wasn't the clean, cathartic kind of crying. It was the ugly kind, the kind that makes your whole body shake and steal your breath. I cried for the 3 years of building something with someone who was willing to destroy it. I cried for Sarah for the fact that she'd been in my home, sat at my table, laughed at my jokes, while apparently laughing at me with my husband. I cried because the world suddenly felt very large and very hostile, and I was very small inside it. When I was done, I sat there for a long time. Then I drove home. Marcus was on the couch when I got there, watching something on Netflix. He looked up like everything was normal. "Hey," he said, "how was Sarah?" It was such a casual question, such a normal question, and that's when I understood that he didn't think I knew, that he thought he'd gotten away with it, that he thought he could keep carrying these secrets indefinitely, and I would just keep being the reliable, steady woman who didn't ask hard questions. "We need to talk," I said. He muted the TV. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the moment where he was trying to figure out what I knew and how much danger he was in. Okay, he said, what about? The hotel, I said, the photo, Sarah. His face went pale, and then instead of denying it or apologizing or doing literally anything that would have made sense, he said, Dakota, it's complicated. I actually laughed, not a real laugh, a broken sound that didn't belong to me. It's complicated, I repeated. That's what you're going with. He stood up, he tried to reach for my arm and I moved away. I can explain, he said. But he couldn't, or maybe he could have, but I didn't want to hear it. Instead, I went upstairs and I packed a bag, clothes, my laptop, my documents, the things I needed to prove that I had existed in this house, that I had mattered, even though clearly I hadn't mattered enough to stay faithful to. Where are you going? Marcus called after me. I didn't answer, I didn't know actually. I just knew I couldn't be here, in this space that was supposed to be safe and wasn't, that had been infected with lies in a way I couldn't unknow. I drove to a hotel and I checked in for the night, and then I sat on a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and I made a list. Not a list of reasons to leave, I already knew I was leaving. A list of all the things Marcus had told me, all the times he'd said he loved me, all the moments I'd thought we were building something real. I wrote it all down and then I started cross-referencing it with facts, with timelines, with the evidence that was right there in front of me if I just looked. It took me 2 weeks to decide what I was going to do. During that time, I moved through the world like a ghost. I was at work, but not really. I was at home, but in a different way. I was performing being normal while my insides had turned into a strange, cold machinery of investigation. Marcus called constantly. He sent flowers to my office, which was humiliating. He told people I was having a breakdown, that I was being irrational, that he didn't know what had gotten into me. And the worst part was watching people believe him, watching the narrative shift around me, watching people start to treat me like the problem, like the unstable woman who'd abandoned her poor, confused husband. His friends, our friends, I'd thought, started pulling back. They didn't want to get involved, they said. They didn't know what had happened, they said. Could I maybe talk to him about it, they said. Nobody asked me what I knew. Then, about 3 weeks after I left, something unexpected happened. I was getting coffee at a place near work, a small cafe that I'd started going to religiously because the barista made the best Americanos and never tried to make conversation. The woman behind the counter was older, maybe in her 60s, with grey hair and kind eyes. Every morning, she'd make my coffee and slide it across the counter, and I'd say thank you and she'd nod. That morning, she handed me my cup, and then she set another cup on the counter beside it. This one's on me, she said. I looked at it. It was a latte with a perfect foam leaf on top. I can't, I started. I saw your face yesterday, she said quietly. When you were sitting in the corner just staring at your coffee, you had the look of someone carrying something very heavy. My daughter had that look once, before she finally put the weight down. I didn't know what to say. I don't know your story, the barista continued, and I'm not going to ask, but I want you to know that whatever it is, you look like the kind of person who's going to be okay. You look like the kind of person who already knows what she needs to do. She turned back to the espresso machine before I could respond, but I stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. And I felt something shift, not healing exactly, but maybe the beginning of it, the beginning of the understanding that I wasn't invisible, that someone had seen me in my worst moment and had recognized something worth saving. I've thought about that woman 1,000 times since then. I never even learned her name. By the 4th week, I was ready. There was a gala. Marcus's company was throwing it, some big tech showcase where all the important people would be. They'd done it every year since I'd known him. It was the kind of event where everyone who mattered in his world would be present, his business partners, his investors, his mentors, his life. And I knew Sarah was going to be there. She'd already posted about it on Instagram. I hired a pie for the last 2 weeks, which felt very much like something I never would have done before. He was thorough. He got me photos of Marcus and Sarah together over the last year, not just the hotel but restaurants, a cabin upstate, a concert I remembered Marcus saying he didn't want to go to because he was tired. He got me text messages through legal means that showed a relationship that had been going on since before Marcus and I were even married, since before. I had everything, the whole ugly, elaborate lie. The day of the gala, I put on a black dress. Not because I wanted to look good for Marcus, I didn't care anymore what he thought of how I looked, but because I wanted to feel like myself, because I wanted to walk in there with my head up. I didn't go through the front entrance. I went around back where I'd met Patricia, my lawyer, earlier in the day, where we talked through what I was going to do, where she told me that legally this was grey, that I could do it without legal consequences, but just barely. I didn't care about consequences anymore. I waited until the speeches started, until Marcus was standing at a podium talking about the future of his company, about his vision, about integrity and innovation, and all the beautiful words that meant nothing coming from him. Then I walked out onto that stage. It happened so fast that for a moment, nobody understood what was occurring. Marcus saw me and his face did this interesting thing, recognition followed by terror followed by anger. "I'm Dakota," I said into the microphone. My voice was steady. That surprised me. "I'm the woman who's been married to this man for 3 years. The room went very, very quiet. "I'm not going to make a scene," I continued. "I'm just going to ask him one question in front of all the people who know and trust him. Marcus, who is Sarah Livingston to you?" He opened his mouth, closed it, looked like he was going to say something dismissive or deny it, and that's when I did it. I held up my phone connected to the projector on the wall and I showed the first photo, him and Sarah, at the beach. Then the next one, him and Sarah at dinner. Then another and another. I'd curated 37 photos over 3 hours. I didn't show the most explicit ones. I didn't need to. The timeline was obvious, the intimacy was obvious, the lie was obvious. "He told me he was working," I said quietly. "He told me he loved me. He told me we were building a life together. And he did all of this behind my back for at least 2 years that I know of, probably longer." I looked at Marcus. I could see tears on his face now, and I felt absolutely nothing at the sight of them. "The thing that gets me," I said, "isn't even the cheating. It's that when I figured it out, when I asked him about it, he looked confused, like he couldn't understand why I would be upset, like my feelings were the problem, not his actions." I stepped back. I didn't want to be near him. I just wanted the people who work with him, who trust him, who are thinking about investing in him. I wanted you to know who you're dealing with. I wanted you to make informed decisions about your lives and your money and your time. Then I handed the microphone back to the person standing off stage, looking horrified, and I walked out of that gala with every eye in the room on me. It was the most dramatic thing I've ever done. It was also the most honest. The fallout was exactly what you'd expect. It made the local news. People took sides. A lot of people took Marcus's side because he was more likable, more successful, more visible. He became the sympathetic one, the man whose psychotic wife had publicly humiliated him. He found a really good therapist and started talking about how he'd made mistakes but was trying to grow. His company suffered but didn't collapse. Sarah disappeared from social media, turned her accounts private. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she moved to California. Patricia helped me divorce Marcus quietly. I got the house which I didn't want, so I sold it and used the money to start a consulting business, something I'd been thinking about for years but never had the courage to do. Just me, my reputation, my expertise. For a long time after I was angry, not the hot kind of anger, the cold kind, the kind that lives in your chest and makes everything taste metallic. But then, one morning about a year after the gala, I went back to that same cafe for coffee. The barista was there. She smiled when she saw me, and something in her expression suggested she recognized me, though she didn't acknowledge what she knew. "The usual?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, "and surprise me with a pastry." She made my coffee while I waited, and as she slid it across the counter she said, "You look lighter." I don't know if that was true, but I wanted it to be true, so I held on to it. I started therapy 6 months after the gala. A woman named Dr. Chen who didn't judge me for the way I'd handled things, even though I judged myself harshly for a long time. She helped me understand that I wasn't broken for being quiet, that my steadiness wasn't a weakness just because someone had exploited it. She also helped me understand something I hadn't expected, that the kindness I'd been shown at that lowest moment by someone I didn't know had mattered more than I understood, that sometimes you have to hit bottom not to find yourself, but to find other people, to find that you weren't alone in the way you thought you were. I kept going to that cafe. Over the next year I learned the barista's name was Margaret. She was a retired teacher who'd worked at the same school for 40 years and had decided she wanted to try something different. We started talking sometimes, small conversations that built into actual friendship. When my consulting business took off, when I made my first significant sale, I went to the cafe and I brought Margaret flowers. She actually cried, which made me cry, which was unexpected and good. Last month, almost 3 years after the gala, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He looked okay, a little older maybe, a little weathered. He was buying wine and fresh vegetables, and he had a woman with him that I didn't recognize. He saw me, made eye contact, and I could see him trying to decide what to do, whether to say hello, whether to apologize, whether to just pretend he hadn't seen me. I nodded at him. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but it was a choice to acknowledge him without being destroyed by the sight of him. He nodded back, and then I went about my day. The twist, if you need one, is that I only fully understood what happened to me when Dr. Chen asked me about it. Do you think Marcus was ever really capable of what you wanted him to be? Or were you in love with the version of him that you'd created? I didn't answer for a long time, because here's what I think now, and I think it so quietly that I barely admit it to myself. I'm not sure Marcus was ever the villain of this story. I think he was just a man who was capable of less integrity than I'd credited him with, and I was just a woman who'd been so focused on being reliable and steady that I'd convinced myself that was enough to build a relationship on. The real villain was me, maybe, for not asking harder questions, for performing stability instead of demanding honesty, for thinking that if I was good enough, quiet enough, reliable enough, then I wouldn't get hurt. That's not how it works. You get hurt anyway. The only difference is how you get back up. I'm back up now. I'm in my office and I have 3 employees, and I make more money than I ever did working for someone else. I have friends who know me, really know me, not just the version of me I perform. I go to that cafe on Friday mornings, and Margaret and I talk about books and her grandchildren, and the small dramas of life that don't break you but just make you more yourself. Do I still think about Marcus sometimes? Yes. Do I still think about that moment at the gala, every single day? But not with anger anymore, with something quieter, with the understanding that I finally, after 30 years, figured out how to be honest about who I was, and that in doing so, I became someone I actually liked. The gala was a terrible thing, and the best thing I ever did. And the woman who made me coffee when she could see I was drowning, she taught me something more valuable than any of the people I married ever did. She taught me that I was worth seeing,